I'm Eugene Hernandez from the Sundance Film Festival here with Sean Baker, and we're sitting inside the Laemmle Monica Film Center in Santa Monica, California for Art House Theater Day, a program of Art House Convergence. Art House Convergence is a national nonprofit that advocates for independent cinemas across the country. So by joining us for this conversation, you're joining audiences from 100 cinemas around the country to celebrate all that art house theaters and independent film contribute to our cultural landscape. Ambitious and innovative art that provokes, challenges, entertains, and inspires.
Independently owned theaters have always needed support, but they need support now more than ever.
Thanks for sharing Tangerine with us on its 10th anniversary as part of Art House Theater Day. And again, thank you for joining us for this special event. And we hope you'll check out the other films playing at Art House Theater Day as well, and tell a friend. So Tangerine, 10 years since it premiered at Sundance and then was in theaters that summer. Maybe for folks who, I'm sure there's folks who will have watched it for the first time at this Art House Theater screening. Tell us a little bit about the origins of it. Tell us about how the project got started, some of the early ideas that shaped this kind of madcap, in many ways, comedy that is also very rooted in a very specific place and moment.
Sure. Well, I live in Los Angeles. I happen to live about less than a mile from the corner of Santa Monica and Highland, and for a very long time it just intrigued me as a sort of an infamous corner known for on the street sex work, primarily with the trans community and with gay hustlers. And so it was something that I thought was very underexplored and something that hadn't been explored since the 80s. So we wanted to figure out, my co-screenwriter, Chris Bergash, and I wanted to figure out a story that could be told on that corner, essentially. Particularly at that donut shop called Donut Time, which is now Trejo's Donuts. Danny Trejo, after Donut Time shut down, he actually bought the establishment and turned it into, thank God he kept it a donut shop and painted it pink and everything. So it actually is one of the few things that actually hasn't changed, locations that have not changed in the area. But anyway, so Chris and I, we were obviously not from that world. We're outsiders. We knew that the only way that we could properly tell a story about that world would be to find consultants and collaborators. And so we went about it the way we normally go about it, where we basically just pound the pavement and introduce ourselves to locals and try to figure out something. And it was one fateful day, that we went over to the LGBT Center, which is right around the corner from Donut Time. And in the courtyard, we spotted Maya Taylor. And she has, as you saw from the movie, she has an incredible presence and wonderful persona and look, and we were immediately captured by her, and we approached her and said, we're interested in making an independent film telling a story about this neighborhood. And she said, I'm here. Yeah, let's do it, and make me the lead. And we said, cool, okay. And we started hanging out with her and hearing stories. And then she introduced us to Katana Kiki Rodriguez. And that dynamic duo really just, we saw the potential in their wonderful dynamic interactions, in their friendship. And we spent the next few months just hanging out with them a few times a week, just hearing their stories and working together and saying, what story can be told here? And then one day, we broke the story, through actually Kiki telling us something that really sparked the initial concept, which was about this search for this a cisgender woman who she suspects of having slept with her boyfriend. So it was it really just rolled from that point on. And Mark and Jay Duplass, the wonderful Duplass brothers, who are indie film rock stars, as you know, they were the ones who said, you know, we have $100,000 for you, and we were like, okay, because at that point this was my 5th film, and you know, I wasn't being offered the millions of dollars from the industry to make a film. So at that point, we didn't want to make another micro budget, but it was the only offer we had. And so we said, okay, we'll take that $100,000, but now we have to figure out a way of making a movie with $100,000. How are we going to do this? And one of the first, I guess, choices that we had to make was how to basically spend no money on the technical side of things. And it was that at that time that the iPhone 5S had just come out, and it was really the leap. It was like the technical advancement of the actual phone, the jump up to HD. Between the 5 and the 5S, it was like from SD to HD. So we were able to shoot SD. We knew we were able to capture something that was at least on par with other HD prosumer cameras, and with a bunch of bells and whistles, a bunch of, you know, accessories that actually were on the market at that time, and an app called Filmic Pro. We felt that we could get something that was cinematic, and we were going to be one of the first to do it. And actually. So we jumped right in and we shot this tiny little movie with a crew of 8, it was a wild ride. It was a wild ride. We went to Sundance the following year, and I thought that we were going to be one of many films shot on the iPhone, because it just seemed like it was the thing to do at that moment. The opportunity was there. And we showed up, and we were the only film having shot on the iPhone. So that actually became a talking point, and became a point of interest to sell the film. But so I don't know. There's a lot more to cover, but I mean that's basically our ride.
It's a great framework for a few threads we can pull on. So you had made a few films before Tangerine, and your approach, and it's so fascinating to hear you talk about that first conversation at the LGBT Center with Maya, and your approach up to this point had been and remains very similar, starting from a very broad place.
Yes.
And you said a second ago, it didn't even start with the story. It started with literally a corner that you probably were driving by back and forth on your home, or going into the donut shop or whatever, and having a kind of curiosity and then going deeper. But this is an approach that remains consistent across your work.
Yeah. I always say that, you know, if you're not from the community or the culture that you're focusing on in a film or telling a story about, you have to go about doing it the most respectful and responsible way possible, because representation is obviously extremely important. And I learned through a film that I made a few years prior called Prince of Broadway, that the way to do that is to collaborate. It's to work with people who actually have lived experience. And if you're lucky enough like me to find not only somebody with that lived experience, but somebody with talent and the enthusiasm and the desire to also to make something, you know, to create something, to create a work of art, well, that's what it takes. And then that's where Maya Taylor came in she was our passport to that world. Without Maya and without Kiki, this film wouldn't exist.
And there's such incredible performances.
Yes.
Let's talk about Maya. Let's talk a little bit more about that collaboration. So you're at the LGBT Center, you start having a conversation with Maya, and you said that Maya was responsive immediately. So what were the first steps towards building the character and then getting to the world of the story you would explore?
Yeah, well, I think the most important step was when Maya said, I want this film to be funny. yes, there are hardships in this community. There's tragedy in this community, but we use humor to cope. And every day when I'm hanging out with my friends, we're having fun and we're laughing. And that's important to show. It's very important to show. And I love to hear that because, I come from a background of comedy. I agree with her that we all use humor to cope, to get through our hard times. And I look at my favorite films and they're always combine, comedy and pathos. It's very important because that's life. That's life, to have the combo of those two. When you leave one of those two elements out, suddenly things don't ring true and they don't seem real anymore. And my films are based in reality. So I need to have that humor. And when I heard that from her, that meant that I knew we were on the same page. I knew we had a similar sensibility. And then Chris and I would go and hang out with Maya and Kiki at the local fast food joint. I think it was an Arby's or something. And we would just be laughing all the time. And sometimes hearing very tragic stories, but the way that they would deliver this and the way that they would, talk about their harder times, but always with a wink and always tongue in cheek and always with a little bit of a joke here or there. It was already forming the style of forming our style, forming our way of writing. So.
And over how much time were you hanging out, chatting, and then over how much time were you actually putting pen to paper, so to speak, to actually shape the story, or was it pretty fluid?
It was pretty. It was a course of maybe 6 months that we were seeing each other regularly. I would say maybe again twice a week, and gathering ideas. And it was this one time where Kiki actually was the one who kind of pitched this idea, the A plot that you just saw in Tangerine, and I loved it. I thought it was great because I had made other films that took place over the course of one day. Takeout is a film that I made. It was my second film, and that film takes place over the course of a 24-hour period of time. So I was already used to that, and I actually think that that's a wonderful, for those independent filmmakers out there, that's one way of keeping costs down. Make it take place over a short period of time. You don't need costume changes. Continuity is as important. So anyway, it was Chris who said, "Why don't we just make this the entire plot? The search for this cisgender woman," and so that's what it was. And so as soon as we figured that out, it was a very quick write. And the way that we wrote that film is that it started with, I would say, a treatment just to get, to show the Duplass brothers and the other entity that produced Through Films, just to show them, what we were going to do. And they said, yeah, sounds good, go for it. I think about a month or two later, we had a scriptment, which I call it. That's my
Elaborate
term.
On that a little bit.
Yeah, for half a script, half a treatment, half a script. It's not fully fleshed out yet, but it was something probably along the lines of a 60-page treatment with some fleshed out dialogue already, and it was definitely, and had all the beats. There were underwritten sections, knowing that we would find that on the day or find that on the set, or sometimes just be completely improvising behind the camera. But there was also a structure. I mean, as you just saw the movie, so there's a beginning, middle, and end, and that stuff was worked out.
It's been 10 years, but can you remember maybe one scene that was more scripted and more thought out, and share an example, and then maybe an example of something that was a little less formed and had to be sort of figured out in the moment? We
knew there was always going to be this climactic confrontation at donut time that we were building up to. Where they finally find Chester, yes. Played by James Ransone, and the characters of Alexandra and Cindy are bringing the character of Dinah, our entire ensemble cast, essentially, meeting at donut time. So that had to be scripted, obviously. The dialogue had to be there. We knew that donut time was at best going to give us like maybe like 2 or 3 nights. So we were going to have to really, we didn't have time for a lot of improvisation. We knew that stuff had to be scripted. And then there were other scenes that we always knew from the very beginning were very important for the film. The last scene of the movie was worked out. You know, the way I always do it, I don't like writing a screenplay until I've figured out beginning, middle, and end. Okay. And that ending was when we figured that out. You know, the sharing of the wig and in the laundromat. Once we figured that out, that's when we started writing. And so a scene like that is obviously very fleshed out, down to the beat, down to sometimes even the shot. We knew, really? Yeah. But then there are other. The whole search for the character of Dinah was very loose because we wanted to actually capture the spontaneity. So that it was scripted as they walk down Santa Monica, right, you know, looking for Dinah. So we just spent several days just out on the road with her, with them, with both Maya and Kiki. I was on my bicycle, holding an iPhone with a little. Back then, there was no stabilization in the camera, so I had to have a handheld stabilizer. So I was a bike messenger back in the day, so I could do this. You know, my left hand on the handlebar and biking behind them and tracking them and
traffic weaving around.
Oh yeah. This was very independent. This film we got obviously permission from the individual locations to shoot at, and we had a blanket permit, but it wasn't really like there was a lot of running and gunning.
You didn't lock down.
We didn't lock down
streets.
Anything. We never really owned any exteriors.
So when we
didn't even own interiors. We didn't own Donut Time. Donut Time, they were wonderful. They allowed us to shoot, and that was really the only location we actually paid for, because we felt it was important. It was like the centerpiece of the movie. So we did our best to find I think under $1,000. It might have been $800 that we actually, because remember, we only had $100,000 to work with.
It's a big portion.
So yeah, so $800 we spent on Donut Time, and they allowed us to shoot in there for I think 2 nights, but we begged for a 3rd night. We got it, but we could never shut down the business. That was the thing. So we would be in the middle of a take and somebody would come in for their coffee and donut, and we would be like, okay, pause everybody. And we would allow the customer to come in, and we didn't want to in any way disturb their business or disrupt their business. So, you know, that was the way we had to do it. We had to just shoot around real life and try to incorporate real life as well sometimes. I mean, you know, sometimes there was a straggler who would come into a shot and we would just keep shooting, and then I would call cut, and then we would have to tell that person, okay, this is an independent film being done. Could you sign this release for us and be a part of this movie? And 99% of the time we would get a yes, and but there were a few times, and actually this is a funny story, on the bus. The bus was pretty much quote unquote stolen, meaning we didn't have permission. We just went on. It's 10 years, right?
Yeah, you can say
limitations. Yeah. So we, just this tiny little crew, we just got on the bus and then just started shooting scenes. And
in a scene like that, are you filming then?
Yes, it was either I was either shooting or my co-DP Radium Chung, who is an amazing cinematographer and actually shot my previous film called Starlet. So it was either, I don't know, it was one of us. And sometimes we did have 2 cameras rolling. Okay. And so, yeah, we would be there just shooting the scene. And there was one time where I captured somebody in the background right behind Kiki and Mickey as they were fighting on the bus. And I thought I had a wonderful take. It was, I said, cut, great everybody, we got it. And then I went to the gentleman behind them and I said, sir, this was an independent film. You were captured on camera. Would you mind signing this release? And he said, yeah, sure, for $10,000. We said, oh, no, that's literally 1/10 of our budget. No, I'm sorry, we can't do that. $20? He's like, no, $9,000. We're like, well, listen, we're not going to get. We're not going to get to a place.
Big difference.
And so we lost that shot. That's one of those things that you have to, when you're doing this sort of movie, you have to be ready for that sort of, perhaps for a disappointment like that, where like things aren't always going to work out. We were actually even contemplating whether we should just use the shot and blur him, but didn't work with the style of the movie, so we actually ended up just reshooting the shot, and we got it. But it's part of the game, part of the But for the most part, everything, shooting this way was very interesting for me, because in the past I shot a film called Takeout on standard definition mini DV. And that was kind of similar, but you're still holding a camera. When we were shooting this, it was holding an iPhone. And it was actually a small iPhone. It was an iPhone 5S, so it was like about half of that size. And, well, what it looks like to somebody on the street, if you saw us across the street shooting, it would just look like we were doing selfies. I mean, it looked like we were just at the most shooting an influencer type video. It had it allowed us to shoot clandestinely. It allowed us to shoot under the radar. We didn't attract a lot of attention. I mean, the only thing that would give us away sometimes that we were semi-professional was Iron Strauss, our wonderful sound person, holding a boom. Right. It was the boom that was the most, obvious, tool, filmmaking tool that would attract attention. So, shooting on the iPhone truly allowed us to immerse ourselves and to really to capture a lot of real life going on, which is really what I wanted with this film, to really feel like it was a lived-in, visceral, energetic, environment.
Have you thought about, or how have you thought about the intimacy it also afforded with all the performers? Because it's probably easy to forget that, other than the boom, I guess, it's easy to forget that the camera's there, or it's not. There's not as much distraction or disruption.
I think that obviously helped. I mean, because there were lots of first timers in this film. Maya and Kiki being two of them. And so the fact that we were able, I think that it wasn't like they were making their first film with this intimidating, huge camera in their face. It was a phone, and everybody shoots on their phones. Everybody takes selfies every day or shots, and so it wasn't intimidating. Though I have to say, at the same time, Maya and Kiki, they proved to be quite, even though it was their first film, they were already, because they came from a background of performance, and they both aspired to be performers on some level. They weren't intimidated anyway. You know what I mean? But I think there were other first timers in the film, and I think the iPhone put them at ease. And again, it just allowed us to really blend in and not attract attention. And also get angles that we couldn't get with other cameras. Getting the iPhone into a corner that you could never get a big camera into, or shooting again, like me going down Santa Monica on my bike. I wouldn't be able to do that with even a handheld camera. It allowed me to do stuff like that.
One other scene I wanted to talk about, maybe you could unpack it for us, because it's such a great scene in the movie, is the scene in the hotel room. And there's just so many great reveals in that scene as you sort of, as an audience member, and rewatching it, as you realize everything that's happening in that scene, and sort of the reveals, and the space gets bigger, I guess.
Yeah, thanks. We just, we wanted those reveals to be comedic. We also wanted it to be sort of our action scene. I mean, that's when, Kiki is literally kicking the door down there. And so, and we wanted it to be crazy. We wanted to bring the audience to a place that perhaps they've never been to. I mean, just doing research for that scene, Chris and I had to, we discovered that these, at least at the time, 10 years ago, that you found these sort of makeshift brothels at, rundown little hotels and motels around Los Angeles. And so let's just say that isn't entirely fictional. That's based on on locations we found out about. For example, that sign that's in the when Cindy is asking the front desk which room they're in, it says, no prostitutes allowed. That was not production design. That wasn't art direction. That was a sign that existed at that particular location. So we were shooting in the real places. We were trying to always shoot in real spaces, and geographically stay accurate as well. There are a few breaks, and if you know Los Angeles, there was maybe a cheat here or there, but for the most part, we wanted it to feel like a journey that the characters were taking the audience on, and it was an actual, like you could actually map it out and say, okay, yeah, no, that is accurate, that it would take them 2 hours to get down to Vine, and how long it would take them to get back to West Hollywood. That stuff was actually, Chris and I, we really wanted to flesh that out and make it work on that level.
I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the other storyline, the other important, I think, storyline in the movie. You've worked with Karen Karagulian a lot, and his role as a taxi driver and everything that storyline affords the movie, culminating in this amazing scene at the car wash. But let's talk a little bit about that collaboration, because it's a long collaboration for you, and folks that have seen Anora will have seen Karen in your most recent one. And going all the way back, Karan.
Yeah, Karen Karagulian, he's been in every one of my films, and he just shined as Toros in Anora, and finally got all the attention that I thought he deserved all along. But this was a big role for him. I remember when he's been in every one of my films. So that was my 5th feature. And I called him and I said, I'm making a film about transgender sex workers on the corner of Santa Monica and Highland in Los Angeles. I have no idea how to work you into this movie. Oh, really? And he goes, are you kidding me? It's LA. Every other cab driver is Armenian. I'm like, I think we just found our B plot. And Karan was always my, I would say, consultant for all things Armenian. So we we worked together to flesh this out and to make it have that cultural specificity, and try to figure out how his character would work in that world. It ended up being that we fleshed out this whole B plot with this Armenian family, and we were able to bring in the stars of Armenia. Ala Tamoyan, who plays his mother-in-law, the other cab driver, played by Arsen Gregorian. These are established, very well-known actors in Armenia. So to tell you the truth, I don't know if many American audiences know this, but the most famous people in the film are the Armenians. So yeah, and it was great to work with Karan on that level. It was a bold move for him too, for many reasons. It was in Armenia. There are obviously, it is difficult for the LGBT community. I think that Karan shined as Razmik, and it was a really brave choice for him to take this character on. And again, without him, I wouldn't. The whole Armenian subplot wouldn't be existent in Tangerine, and I think it's vital. So, because it just shows another aspect of Los Angeles. I was trying to, with this film, Chris and I were trying to show sides of Los Angeles that you don't normally see in Hollywood film and television, one of the reasons I wanted to make Tangerine is because I saw this corner, and I saw, obviously there were stories stories that could be told about this world and in this world. But I had never seen it, even though it was the center of Hollywood, the center of the movie industry. I had never seen movies about that world. So I wanted to show a side of Los Angeles that we don't normally see on the big screen. And that's not just the communities, but that's also the transportation. You know, you don't see people taking public transportation in our movies, except for maybe Speed, where it's like the focus. But besides that, you know, how often do you see characters riding the bus in movies about Los Angeles? Very rarely. So it was also our intention to show that stuff.
And I remember some of the reviews at the time. As someone who grew up here, some people being surprised to see that there's a subway in Los Angeles. So great incorporation of the subway as well. Well, it's a movie that that has so many relevant threads that I think make it so wonderful to revisit 10 years later.
Thank you. Yeah, and the team that I worked with, just so special. Everybody was just such guerrilla filmmakers, you know, from our wonderful producers, Darren Dean and Shiching Zhou, and again, my wonderful cinematographer, Radium Chung, you know, and my co-screenwriter, Chris Bergosh. We were just a tiny little ragtag, you know, little motley crew, but we pulled this thing off and we're quite proud of it, especially 10 years out, looking back on it. And we were able to, I think some theaters might actually be able to show this film on 35 millimeter. We struck a 35 millimeter print of this film, which is very cool for a cinephile to know that.
iPhone to 35?
Yeah, going from iPhone to 35 millimeter. And the translation is wonderful. I mean, it really does look wonderful on the big screen. It has a very cinematic look. So if you're lucky enough to see the print, good for you. That's the way I want you to see it. You know, and overall, it really taught us a lot. I mean, we only had $100,000 to work with, and that means everything. We had to get all of those locations for pretty much for free. People had to work for next to nothing. But we still at the same time made sure that everybody was compensated right and paid properly. That was where most of the money went, actually, into just, you know, and into paying people properly for, you know, to work on the film. Everything else was pretty much stolen, you know. Even music was actually, as you know, it's almost wall-to-wall sound, and we didn't budget for music. We didn't budget for music because I thought this was going to be very much a very like music-free social realist movie. When I sat down and started editing this movie, I realized it needed a beat. It needed, and I fell in love with trap music at the time. So that's what really got. I realized that it needed a soundtrack, and I was reaching out to SoundCloud artists and seeing if they would contribute to the movie for credit or for very little, and they all did. It was wonderful to get this almost organic, homegrown soundtrack that I think really holds up. You can get a playlist on Spotify, you know, and get every track on it. So yeah. Looking back, it was really like an independent film school in a way. You know, their PAs that worked on it had a wonderful time because they learned so much. They learned more being on this little tiny movie than, you know, 4 years of film school.
It's amazing. As a final observation, and as we close out this conversation, thank you, Sean. So much of what you've talked about the making of the movie, about the way you embarked on it, some might see as constraint or hear about all the constraints you faced. And yet, as we look at this film now, 10 years on, and as we are able to see this in the context of all of your work over that time, what I actually observe for you is freedom. So what some folks might see as constraint, you embody as freedom.
Yeah, I think that's very important, especially for independent filmmakers who might not have, you know, they don't have the money to splurge and to create. You actually have to, sometimes you can't create the worlds. You have to just go and shoot in the world that you want. So you have to embrace the limitations. You have to embrace, you know, the stuff that would normally, I think, is seen as a hindrance. You have to embrace that stuff, because that's where actually as a filmmaker, I see that sometimes that's where the happenstance comes from. That's where serendipity comes from. When you put yourself in an environment and you don't completely control it, it can be scary, but at the same time, it can bring you gifts. It can bring you, I always say, you know, the film gods bring you so much when you just allow them to, when you just look and look around you and you see all the gifts that life is just bringing you, real world is bringing you. You have to have that way of thinking as an independent filmmaker. Embrace that stuff. It'll make your films richer.
Well, Sean Baker, thank you for embodying that, for sharing the story with us today. Congratulations on all the success you've seen this past year. And we're just so thrilled to have you as an audience participating in Art House Theater Day and celebrating the work that we're showing as part of this program. And again, thank you to Sean. We hope you enjoyed Tangerine.
Keep seeing movies on the big screen.